Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this Township of Cavan-Monaghan regular council meeting on Monday, March 6th, 2023 at 1 p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. We'll begin the meeting with our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Cavan-Monaghan is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to First Nations for their care for and teachings about these lands. May we honor these teachings. I'll look to council for approval of the agenda before us today. Councillor Byrne, Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is carried. There is no, disclosure of pecuniary interest, any today? Seeing none, we'll move forward. There is no closed session. We will now begin the public meeting. I'm looking for a resolution to open the public meeting. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. We'll now have a presentation from Connor Michener with regards to the Heritage Bylaw update. Connor.
Thank you, Mayor Graham, and good afternoon. I'm Connor Michener, and I'm the Heritage Coordinator here at the Township of Cavan-Monaghan. So this presentation that we have brought up here, it's intended to give a brief overview of a project being undertaken by the Township to update our heritage designation bylaws. These bylaws protect 52 historic properties across the Township. Today, we're just talking about later on 2 bylaws that cover 9 properties. So before I get started, I'll mention that this presentation is just giving a general overview on heritage designation, the process involved in updating our heritage bylaws, and a couple examples of what old and new heritage bylaws are to look like. This presentation is followed by a staff report that contains further information on specific heritage designations we're talking about today. In addition, drafts of each proposed replacement heritage bylaw are provided in the agenda package for this meeting. So we'll go on to the next slide. So I'll briefly go over sort of an overview of what this project entails, outline the process for updating heritage designation bylaws, provide a couple examples of both existing bylaws and their challenges, as well as some drafts of new bylaws for heritage designation. I'll mention a couple of resources for heritage properties that property owners and people interested in heritage conservation may be interested in, and then there will be time for some questions and comments. Thank you. So the township has 14 bylaws designating 52 different properties of cultural heritage value or interest under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Well, at the time of their enactment, they were in compliance with legislative requirements. These bylaws are now both lacking in information regarding the cultural heritage value or interest of each property, and they also don't meet the current requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act. So these things include proper descriptions of the locations of properties, their heritage attributes, and how they meet prescribed criteria outlined by Ontario Regulation 906. Next slide, please. So we are proposing the repeal and replacement today of, or not today, but we are talking about the repeal and replacement of Village of Millbrook bylaw number 84-8 and Village of Millbrook bylaw 84-12. These replacements will provide more information on each property's cultural heritage value or significance, provide each property with its own individual designating bylaw, and bring the designating bylaws into compliance with current legislative requirements. Next slide. So to address some more general concerns about heritage designation, heritage designation does not obligate an owner to restore property to an earlier historical appearance, for example, lost or damaged features. Heritage designation does not either, it also does not restrict the use of a property, but just provides protection from unsympathetic changes and hasty demolition. Heritage designation is a tool that we use to protect significant pieces of history that matter most to our community. And it also acts as a recognition of the work that homeowners do in maintaining their heritage homes. Next slide, please. So we'll briefly go over the process that we undergo for updating these heritage bylaws. So a number of these steps have been done already. So they include starting with data collection, visiting each property, doing historical research, taking photos of the current state of each property, talking with property owners, and kind of gaining any information that we can on the history and significance of the property. Then we draft replacement bylaws containing as much historical information as possible to sort of add some meat to the bones of these heritage designation bylaws. Then we held a public open house to introduce the project to the public, consulted with our Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee, provided a 30-day notice of intent to enact these new designations and notice of a public meeting. Public meeting is the step that we're at here today. And it's where the public has the opportunity to comment and object on our intention to repeal and replace these specific bylaws that we're mentioning today. Eventually, there will be a recommendation to council and hopefully a decision on the proposed bylaws. And then after, if the new bylaws were to be enacted, there's a 30-day appeal period to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Next slide, please. So I'll go into a brief example of what some of the current bylaws look like. So the heritage designation bylaws on the different properties throughout the township were written between 1984 and 1995, somewhere around those dates. So they're quite old, they're quite outdated and lacking in a lot of information. So you can't necessarily read what's on the screen right here, but I'll go to the next slide and we'll give some examples of the information that's in these existing bylaws. So the first property that I'm just taking as an example here, this one's 17 King Street East. It's a storefront that everyone's probably fairly familiar with. So the existing heritage designation bylaw on this property outlines a few things. So first is just the address, as well as a number of other addresses that are covered in this bylaw, which is something that we don't do anymore. We're aiming to get each individual property its own individual bylaw rather than grouping them together. The second point is it's designated as being of historical or architectural value, and it's an important component of the former village of Millbrook. So that's sort of the generic information that it provides. And then on the next slide, there are sort of the more crucial pieces of information on the property. So a very long legal description that is sort of in an outdated format that we don't use anymore. And then the very last piece on the third image to the right is sort of the most important piece. It's the architectural or historical significance of the property. And it's in this example only about a paragraph long. So I will go on to the next slide and explain sort of the details that it does provide in this paragraph. So it talks about the building in particular being of Second Empire design. It mentions the mansard roof, as well as some oval decorated dormers and some heavy brackets. So these are just features that they're outlining that are of significance of this property. However, it does miss a number of other notable features in the original designating bylaw that we would argue are important to maintain as part of the sort of character defining features of the building. And that's something that we're hoping to address in the updated bylaws. So on that note, on the next slide, here's an example of a replacement bylaw for this property that we're looking at. It's about 4 pages long, and it will address some of the missing components that I had outlined previously. So on the next slide, it will show basically simple information to start, the address of the property, as well as an approximate location in the township of the property. That's one thing that's missing in the existing bylaw that we're required to provide right now, sort of where you find it in the township. Followed by a more simplified legal description that is sort of up to date with how we legally describe properties today. And then sort of the most important features, the most important parts of the new bylaw are sections 4, 5, and 6. So it's the reasons for designation, basically outlining which criteria outlined by the Ontario government in Ontario Regulation 906 the property meets and how each of the features meet that that criteria. Then it's followed by a statement of cultural value, basically outlining sort of the significant historic information that we have on the property, if there is any relation to notable figures or notable time periods or any other sort of notable information on the property that contributes to its historic significance. And then the very final section 6 is the heritage attributes or the character defining features of the building. And we have a much sort of longer and more detailed list of features that contribute to the heritage value of the property. And this is sort of what allows us to more easily understand which features should be conserved in the case of an alteration being proposed or something like that. So I will give one more example on the next slide. We'll look at a residential property as an example. So this is another property covered under the exact same bylaw, bylaw 84-12. So this property, 53 King Street West. On the next slide, again, it outlines the address of the property as well as that it's designated as being of historical or architectural value to the former village of Millbrook. It doesn't provide any details just yet. But then if we go to the next slide, we'll go to one more over. It provides, again, the legal description, very long and confusing legal description, as well as the architectural and historical significance of the property. And this one's even shorter. It's about 1 to 3 sentences long. It does mention that it's a large farmhouse. It has Georgian and Italian influence, built as the rectory for the nearby Anglican church, and that it's of significance to the village. But there's no features outlined that contribute to the heritage character of the property. It's missing a lot of the information that we require today. So on the next slide, I'll continue again with an example of a new bylaw for this specific property and this property only. So it addresses some of the missing information outlined in the last slides. And again, one more slide forward, it basically addresses the address, the approximate location of the property, a new legal description, and then the 3 most important parts: the reasons for the designation or the criteria that it meets as outlined by the Ontario government, as well as a statement of cultural value, and then the specific heritage features of interest of the property. So it's a longer and more specific list of character defining heritage features to make future discussion on heritage value of the property easier. So on the next slide, I'll just give a quick summary. Heritage designation is a tool that we use to protect significant pieces of history that matter the most to us, and it's a step towards sustainable growth and economic development in the township. Designations are not being permanently repealed under this project that we're talking about today. The repeal of each of these outdated bylaws is only subject to the enactment of a new, more detailed and clearer bylaw. And to be clear as well, we're not proposing any new designations at this time. It only applies to existing designations that are no longer in compliance with provincial legislation and are lacking in information. So I just wanted to make that about as clear as we can. So our goal is to make life easier for property owners, council, and township staff, as well as provide transparency to the process of dealing with our wealth of heritage assets. And on the second last slide here, I just have a couple of resources that are useful for people interested in heritage work or who own heritage properties. On all levels of government, the federal, provincial, and municipal government have put out resources that people can rely on for dealing with heritage properties, or sort of how to approach alterations or any sort of interventions with heritage properties. So these are all available online. Happy to provide them if anybody would like to check them out. But on that note, that is the end of my presentation, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. Very well done. Some of us have seen this presentation before at the public meeting, so nothing much has changed, but we're looking forward to repealing the outdated bylaws and getting more wholesome information up there to protect heritage in the community. So thank you for that. I'm assuming that is the report, and the presentation, Connor, is a summation of the report before council today. So with that, I'll turn it over for council. Have any questions with regards to the presentation? Councillor Byrne?
Through you, Chair, if one of these heritage homes, after the bylaw has been amended and updated and falls within all the guidelines, if a new owner purchases that one property, is there any mechanism or availability for that person to rescind or repeal if for whatever reason they didn't want that designation? And the other part I'd like to ask, in the unsightly event of a fire or something like that that destroyed something that's already designated and has the new bylaw, is there any legal implications on like the house insurance that they have to rebuild it with the same curb appeal?
Through you, Chair. To respond to the first question, property owners can request the repeal of a designation on their property. However, it goes through a similar process as we're going through right now. It sort of has to be brought to council, and council would decide on that based on staff recommendations. To address the second question, as I sort of mentioned, a heritage designation doesn't require a property owner to rebuild or sort of reconstruct any missing features or features that were lost, an example, by a fire or something like that. And a common misconception in terms of insurance and heritage homes is that some insurance providers think that a heritage designation requires that you rebuild a like-for-like copy of the house if something were to happen to it, and that's not the case. A heritage designation bylaw just protects what exists and tries to sort of conserve the existing features. If they're lost, that's unfortunate, and we try to prevent that they're lost, and that's why we're trying to do the work that we're doing here to sort of outline the most important features. But there's no requirement that something that has been lost be brought back.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Connor. Thank you very much for bringing this report forward and putting all this together. I know, having sat on the Mr. Hack committee for a number of years, this thing took a long time to get to this point. So I appreciate a lot of your effort going into it. So one question is with section 4, reason for designation. Is that more or less a boilerplate, like yes, no section, or is there more behind the reason? It kind of seems like it's more like, yeah, it meets a criteria, so then we can continue forward, or is there anything more to that one than that?
Through you, Chair. That's a fairly apt description of that section. So we're required to outline which criteria, which are laid out by the Ontario government, the property meets. And for designation, the property needs to meet 1 or 2 criteria. It used to be 1 criteria off of a specified list. Now it's 2 criteria off of that list. It's either having design or physical value, historical or associative value, or contextual value within the village. And the further sections to follow sort of outline how the property meets those criteria, but that section sort of just outlines, yes, it meets these criteria. These are the ones that it meets.
Thank you. And, one last follow-up question. If we were to designate further properties, can you do it without the property owner's permission? Like I know we have our public meetings and whatnot, and if the property owner isn't made aware of them and doesn't know about them, and we designate the property, is it too late, or is there a criteria where we actually have to have a discussion with the property owner themselves prior to proceeding? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. The property owner is always notified of any process like this. So even in this case right now, we are required by the Ontario Heritage Act to provide notice of our intention to repeal and replace the designation on their property. So in the case of a new designation, if we wanted to go forward with that, first the property would have to be listed on a heritage register, and then if council decided that they wanted to designate that property, a notice would have to be served both on the property owner as well as sort of to the general public. And the property owner has their opportunity, as we're doing here, to comment or object to that intention, and then it kind of goes back to council to decide whether or not the designation goes forward. If the property owner were to disagree with council's decision to designate a property, then they do have the opportunity to appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and then it goes further from that point. But the property owner is always looped into the conversation. It's never done behind their back in that sense.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Natchop.
Through you, Chair. Just for clarity, can you give me an example of how often that the township in the past 10 years has enacted one of these designations on someone's property? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. The last designation would have been in the mid-90s. So it's been a very long time since we've designated any new properties. Obviously, with limited resources, it takes quite amount of effort to put through a new designation. And that's why we're trying to focus on sort of revamping the existing designations before even thinking about putting any new ones out there. But it's been probably going on 20 years.
Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, we do have the opportunity now to welcome members of the public that wish to speak to the bylaw, the presentation, and the reports. If anyone willing to speak, you can step forward now and state your name and address for the record. You have that opportunity. Going once, going twice. Seeing none, we'll move forward then to consideration of the report. Council, there are 2 recommendations in the report for us. Looking for a mover and a seconder. If there's no other conversation, moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Natchop. All in favor? That is approved. Thanks very much, everyone, and thank you, especially Connor, for that presentation and all your work on that. I know it's a big project, and we're happy to have you working on it. So thank you. Very good. Let's catch up here. Moving on to the next portion, we have minutes from the regular council. Oh, sorry. Say it again, sir.
Resolution.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. We need a resolution from council to close the public meeting. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. Very good. Thank you, everyone. Now, before us, we have the minutes from the regular meeting held on February 21st. Can I have a mover to receive to adopt those minutes? Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Excellent. Thank you very much. Then there are two sets of minutes from our committee and boards before us as well. We need a mover and a seconder for those minutes. Councillor Natchoff, Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. We'll move on now to the reports portion of the meeting. Report 9.1, the Mount Pleasant County Estates Subdivision Agreement. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you, Mayor Graham, members of council. Planning report 2023-08 is before you today with the recommendations that council recognize Gwendolyn Court and Meadow Lane East as the street names for streets A and B respectively in subdivision application 15T17002. And secondly, that bylaw number 2023-11 be approved to authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the subdivision agreement between Mount Pleasant Country Estates, Inc. and the Corporation of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan with the insertion of final financial numbers and other minor edits authorized by the township solicitor and or CAO. Those minor edits. So at the time of drafting of this report, we were awaiting an updated construction cost estimate, which we have now received. It has been reviewed by the Director of Public Works. So we just need to finalize some of the details in the financial section of the agreement, and then it will be ready for signing.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. So a bit of housekeeping with regards to the multi-year project that has been this Mount Pleasant Estates. Questions, members of council? Seeing none, we'll look for a mover for those two recommendations in the report. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. 9.2 report, again, Ms. Ellis with regards to Springville Heights.
Thank you, Mayor Graham, members of council. Planning report 2023-09 is before you today with the recommendation that bylaw number 2023-12 be approved to amend bylaw number 2018-58 as amended with regard to the land subject to draft approved plan of subdivision 15T-21003, affectionately called Springville Heights, in part of lot 23, concession 11 of Cavan. For those of you who sat on the previous council, we did have a public meeting related to the plan of subdivision and the zoning bylaw amendment previously. We did hear a number of public comments, and those comments were reviewed in previous reports to council. The plan of subdivision has subsequently received draft plan approval. And with those draft plan approval conditions, the applicant is now working their way through those conditions. And this is one of the conditions that needs to be satisfied. The draft bylaw that was previously presented to the public is the same as the bylaw being presented to you today.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Questions with regards to the bylaw, members of council? Seeing none, looking for a mover for the recommendation in the report with regards to Springville Heights, Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Moving on, we'll move to 9.3, the report from Public Works Emergency Repair on well number 3. I believe Jessica will be presenting this report today. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Public Works Report 2023-03 emergency repair work on well number 3. The recommendation before you is that council receive for information that staff have proceeded with the emergency relining and rehabilitation works for well number 3 at the municipal well site on King Street, as per section 5.7 emergency and time sensitive purchases of the township purchasing bylaw number 2020-22 by Lotto Water Technical Services Inc. from Paris, Ontario, in the amount of $136,350 net municipal HST in the amount of $2,399.76 for a total amount of $138,749.76. And the funds were approved in the 2023 capital budget under water and wastewater with the estimate of $150,000. And I do want to reiterate, wells 1 and 2 are operational still. It just well 3 is under construction and out of service due to this.
Thank you, Jessica. Just a question. So these works are currently underway. Is that correct? And is there a timeline of when the estimated completion date is at this time?
Through you, Chair, yes, the work is being completed and we are waiting for fair weather to make sure that these repairs can be done properly.
Thank you. Questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. Am I to understand when you go to put the stainless steel liner in, that hasn't been done yet? At that point in time, you need to draw down the water to a lowest level possible and maintain it for that period of time in order for that grouting to be put in and properly sealed. I'm trying to figure out in my own mind, where are you going to pump all that water to during that process? And I don't know whether well 3 is still operational to pump down that column of water initially, and then the pump be removed to put the sleeve in, or how you're guessing that you're going to be able to maintain that low level in well 3.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Burns. So there is a number of options that the company is looking after. One is that they create a sort of plug in well 3 to keep the water from rising into the well while they're repairing it. And then the other is to run wells 1 and 2, not treating them, so there's no chlorine, no chemicals in it, and discharging it to the storm system while these repairs are maintaining.
Follow-up question?
Also curious, so were these 3 wells relatively put in within the same time frame? Are we to expect that the same kind of wear on the casings will be in the near future for either one of the other 2?
Through you, Chair. The well we are speaking of was constructed in 2002. I believe it was the most recent well drilled. These other 2 wells are older. Well number 1 has had repairs done, and the casing was out of sound, so there was nothing wrong with it. But we do preventative maintenance on these wells to ensure that we catch it before these issues are to happen.
Thank you, Jessica. Other questions? Again, Councilor Byrne.
So that kind of surprised me. So the most recent well is the one we're having the issues with now. Is there any reason for that?
Through you, Chair. There's no obvious reason why this could happen. It could have been the original construction of the steel liner that is currently there, but it doesn't negate the fact there are issues and we will repair them. But yes, there's no obvious reason why this could happen.
Other questions? Seeing none, we have 2 recommendations in the report before us. We're just receiving it for information though at this time. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Natchoff, Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is carried. Moving on, we now have Mr. Hancock, or is it Drew, I believe, speaking to, excuse me, the tandem truck tender. Drew, to you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. Through you, Chair, to Council, there are 2 recommendations for the tandem truck tender T-PW-23-02. The recommendations before you today are that Council award the tandem truck tender T-PW-23-02 to Winslow Girolami Motors Limited at the lowest tender amount of $358,818. The total tender amount with net municipal HST is $365,133.20. The second recommendation is that Council approves the over expenditure of $7,133.20 to be approved in the 2024 capital budget for the purchase, or for the fund of the purchase.
Thank you, Drew. So just for clarification, what we're looking for is a pre-approval in the 2024 capital budget. So next year's budget, when we get that report of all the projects and all the forecasted expenditures, this one will be one line in there for the $7,133 that will be spent on the truck tender. Questions, members of council? Seeing none, we'll look for a mover and a seconder for the recommendations in the report. Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Very good. Thank you very much, Drew. Council committee verbal reports. Any members of council with a verbal report they'd like to provide today? Councilor Natchoff.
Through you, Chair. I had the pleasure of having the first meeting with the Millbrook Valley Trails. We established a chair and a vice chair and just discussions on the implementation of the new bridge, which was to be completed last Thursday. And yeah, excited to move forward with this committee and get out and walk the trails and let's see what good things that we could do to improve the system. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Natchoff. Other members of council? Councilor Byrne?
Through you, Chair, I hope this is appropriate. A few weeks back, I was up to Lakefield for the rollout of some mental health unit rolling clinics. Anyways, in further dialogue after that day, I've become aware that at some point in time, those vehicles need to be stored inside at all possible during the winter months because they're equipped with facilities that are water related. So I'm just thinking at this point, I was just going to make it aware that if there's a possibility at all, if staff could look into the possibility that when we become occupants of the new fire hall up the hill here, that the facility down in Millbrook on the main street that used to be our fire hall, that there might be some consideration looked into for the purpose of possibly extending an invitation to make use of that for the winter months only, or whatever works for the purpose of storing that vehicle to make it more useful for not only our area, but they're also going to service Northumberland. So if that's an option, then I hope this is the right place to do it.
Sure. I think staff can take that under consideration as an option, and obviously we need to finalize the new fire hall first and foremost while it's not in use, but I think council or staff can add that to the considerations when we move forward, when we get closer to the time when that date is. Is that acceptable, Ms. Hurley? Very good. The only other any other verbal reports? I have one slightly. I just wanted to commend the Historical Society. I know Councilor Natchoff was as well in attendance for the Mr. Winslow storytelling evening. It was really interesting. Really a great event, and it was packed. It was really full in the Legion there, so it was nice to see everyone, and it was a really entertaining event. And yeah, so kudos to the Historical Society for putting that together and holding it. It was a great event despite the weather. That is it. We'll look for a mover and a seconder for those committee and verbal reports. Councilor Natchoff, Councilor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. General business, we have one item for general business, a slight amendment to the meeting schedule. That was provided in the report. Any questions, members of council, with regards to that adjustment? Seeing none, very good. We'll look for a mover and a seconder for those amendments to the schedule. Councilor Natchoff and Councilor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. We have one item for correspondence for information, which is the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario letter, just letting us know that the bingo hall at the Downs has been approved for 3 or less events per week. Not sure when those will be starting up, but this is a formal letter of endorsing or legalizing those proceedings to occur. So we're very excited for that. And I know there's already 3 community associations which are recognized to be the beneficiaries of that. So they'll obviously be tremendously excited to get those funds up and running. Look for a move. Any questions with regards to that piece? If not, we can just look for a mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councilor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. Correspondence for action. We have one item that I'm going to ask Ms. Page to speak to. Ms. Page, if you would.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. Through you to the rest of council. Before you is a resolution from the town of Petrola regarding having the province of Ontario conducting the actual elections for the school board. So as it stands right now in Peterborough County, for example, because ourselves and Selwyn have the highest population, Selwyn manages English separate, we manage English public. So ultimately it's like running 2 completely separate elections. So what we are looking for is due to exactly like the motion says, the extensive amount of resources, time management to coordinate these elections. We are asking for your support to request that the province of Ontario continue and be responsible for conducting these elections for their school board trustees.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, what do you see as the pros and cons other than just one basic election. Is there any negatives here that I'm not catching on?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Byrne. So there's a couple things. So ultimately, right now, the province of Ontario has been legislated to mandate and regulate the voters list. So I think it does make sense and it's timely for them to start to take over the Municipal Elections Act or the school board elections. Historically, it made more sense because we were the ones that managed it and we had more of a better understanding at the local level. I think what's happened with this election, there's 2 or 3 trustees that we know of that have been appointed. And unfortunately, they're not in the right riding because the proper people haven't checked those boundaries. So I think it really needs to go to the province. They're the ones that redraw the boundaries when it comes to school boards and all of that. So I think it's the right people that will make sure the right people are appointed. And I think that is our biggest pro to this.
To you, Ms. Page, is there any fiduciary considerations in the letter as well with regards to the cost associated with the municipality for executing those elections?
Through you, Chair, to you. We've been blessed in Cavan Monaghan because for the last, as long as I can remember, our trustee has been acclaimed. So ultimately, we would have to run an entire election similar. So it would almost be, I don't want to say twice as much because we would only be responsible for the one section, but definitely there would be an increased cost that is not compensated from the province that the taxpayers are borne.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Other questions, members of council? So I believe we are looking for a motion to, I'll read it out loud, that council support the resolution from the town of Petrolia regarding the Ontario School Board elections and request that staff forward this motion to Honorable Stephen Lecce and Minister of Education and to Laurie Scott, our MPP. And I look for a mover and a seconder for that. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. The bylaws, we have 2 bylaws. Bylaw number 2023-11 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a subdivision agreement between Mount Pleasant Country Estates, Inc., subdivider, and the Corporation of the Township of Cavan Monaghan be read a first, second, and third time and signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Councillor Byrne, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. The second bylaw be bylaw number 2023-12, being a bylaw to amend the bylaw number 2018-58 as amended, otherwise known as the Township of Cavan Monaghan zoning bylaw. Looking for a mover, Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is also approved. There is no finished business. Any notices of motion? Seeing none. There is the confirming bylaw being bylaw number 2023-13, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held this March 6th, 2023, be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor. That is approved. I'll look for a mover to adjourn our meeting today. Councillor Natchoff, Councillor Edgerton, all in favor. That is approved. There's a list of upcoming meetings and events before us. There is a Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee meeting on Thursday, March 16th at 9 a.m. in the council chambers. Our next regular council meeting is Monday, March 20th at 1 p.m. The Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting is Tuesday, March 21st at 1 p.m. in the council chambers. The Cavan Monaghan Public Library Board meeting is Tuesday, March 21st at 7 p.m. at the library. And Millbrook Valley Trails Advisory Committee meeting meets Monday, March 27th at 4 p.m. in the council chambers. Thank you, everyone.